I'm the author of Edda Invincible, and I'm here with...
I'm Megan E. Freeman. I'm the author of Alone, a novel in verse. And we're excited to be here at Second Star because we actually met virtually during the pandemic. We were on a panel together for a conference in Michigan, and we both have books about girls, and dogs feature very prominently in both books. So it's so cool that Reese is here in Denver.
Yeah.
And we get to actually meet and be in a bookstore in person.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks to Second Star for having us. So I'll talk a little bit about what the book's about. So Edda Invincible is about a girl named Edda, who's right here, who is dealing with some uncertainty in her life. She's had a new chronic illness diagnosis. She's making a new friend here who's also going through some changes in his life, and then they happen upon a very magical train in Chicago that is also malfunctioning. And Eliezer's dog, Louisa May Alcott, gets lost on the train, and so they have to go on a big adventure to find the dog, save the dog, and then in the process also fix the train so they can save their city.
And it's fantastic, I'm here to tell you. Alone is a completely different kind of story. It is a contemporary reimagining of the classic children's book, Island of the Blue Dolphins, but it's set in contemporary Colorado. So it's about 12-year-old Maddie who gets this idea with her two best friends to have a secret sleepover with no adults present, and they lie to their families so they all think that they're with somebody else. Maddie tells her mom she's with her dad, she tells her dad she's at her mom's, and the plan is to be in her grandparents' empty apartment, but nobody will know they're there. And at the last minute, her two best friends can't come. So she ends up spending the night by herself, and when she wakes up, the entire town has been evacuated and abandoned, and she's been left behind. And the story unfolds from there, and it's an adventure survival story of her figuring out what she's gonna do to survive and whether she should stay or go or try to find other people. But she's alone for many, many months, except her loyal companion, George, who is a Rottweiler, who features prominently in the story. And I will say, no spoilers, but he is still alive at the end, so no worries for the dog. And it's written in verse, so it's written in poetry, as opposed to prose, which Edda Invincible is in prose.
Yes.
But they have some interesting similar themes. And I, as I was reading your book is much newer. Your book came out in 22.
Yeah.
Alone came out in 21. But there's an interesting emotional turning point that comes for both characters that I think is similar.
Yeah.
That I want to talk about. But I have questions for you.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Because this is so, you're still sort of in launch mode, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
just
that's
came
pretty
out
fun.
recently.
So as I was reading this book, there's so many things I love about it, and not least of which it has this graphic novel sort of component to the beginning.
Yes.
In that the main character, I don't know if she would say this, but we see right from our vantage point, she's sort of an aspiring graphic novelist.
Yes.
Right. And hold up the opening pages, because it's so cool how it starts off and it feels like it's going to be a graphic novel.
Yes.
It's so beautiful.
And so it starts off with the graphic novel. It introduces Invincible Girl, which is the superhero that Edda has created and that she's writing stories about. And then you kind of, as you read the first couple of pages, you see the transition here.
This is my favorite. Yeah, it's so great.
To where Invincible Girl, and then you're seeing that it's actually Edda working on the story and writing the comic and graphic novel herself. So
the whole notion of the superheroic alter ego is such a great device, because we get sucked into the fantastic world that Edda's creating, but then also Edda references this sort of inspirational superhero to inspire her through these really, really challenging situations she finds herself in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about like seeing her, this alter ego, as both this kind of like perfect, super strong version of herself, and then also realizing that maybe that strength isn't the end all be all, and that, that heroism isn't always just kind of this kind of thing. But I do love thinking about that. When I was talking to students At a school visit today, I always ask them what superpower they would give their
cool.
alter ego superhero if they were going to create one. So.
And Invincible Girl, what's her superpower?
So hers is just that she is really, really strong. She's basically invincible. So there's even a panel here where she talks about eating kryptonite for breakfast. So Superman's weakness can't stop her at all. So she's basically unstoppable. But it's interesting actually because the book used to be called Edda Invisible. And the superhero was Invisible Girl, and her power was invisibility. But as the book kind of evolved during revisions and things, we realized that the Invincible Girl, that those powers kind of matched the themes of the story a little bit better than the invisibility that we started off with.
That's such a cool fact. What a fun fact. Okay, so that actually leads me to another question, and maybe it's a coincidence then. So the dog in the book is named Louisa May Alcott, which before you even read the book, you have to just love it, right?
Yeah.
Like, how great is that? So did you know that there's a biography of Louisa May Alcott called Invincible Louisa?
Did not know
that.
Oh
my gosh.
Oh my gosh.
For sure. I thought for sure. So that's just serendipity.
Oh, I'll have to check that out. Yeah.
It's been around a long time. I want to say the author's last name is Miggs, M-E-I-G-S, but I should look that up. But yes, Invincible Louisa. So I thought for sure that was a thing. See, it was meant to be. It was meant to be. So I'm curious about the Little Women theme that goes through it, because it's more than just the name of the dog. There are multiple references to Little Women. How did you know from the beginning that you wanted to have that illusion in there, and that the dog would be?
Yeah, I think I knew from the beginning that was going to be Eleazar's favorite book, that it was going to be important and special to him, and then I knew that I wanted the dog to be named after the author. But I think that it wasn't until later that I kind of really was thinking about how it fits into the theme, because originally it was more just about Eleazar's connection with his grandma and sharing that favorite book, and then later on it became during that scene when they're in a storm on the train and they end up reading part of the book, and it becomes important. And so I think that came later as I was working on that, and I was like, oh, this kind of this fits, like these fit together. So
well, and it's cool because it's cool that it's a book that's meaningful to him. And he, the whole idea of girl books and boy books, which you address beautifully in there, is like there's no such thing, right? But there are so many moments, and it's funny too because you have a quote in there about sailing. I'm not afraid to sail my ship, or I'm not afraid of the storm. I'm learning to sail my ship. Which I just used that exact quotation as an epigraph for the manuscript that's about to go out on sub that my agent has. So there's all this sort of Alcott stuff flying around. That's really fun. So there's also quite a bit of Spanish in the book. Do you speak Spanish?
I speak mediocre Spanish, but it came about because Edda and Eleazar, they go to a bilingual school where there's a bilingual program, and so I was a school social worker for 7 years, and so I was working in schools that were 50% English program, 50% bilingual program, and so and then some of the things they do with like the technology to communicate and translate what came from my experiences working with students and their families in schools. So that's really how neat. That came about.
So one of the things that's key about Edda is that she is suffering some pretty significant hearing loss, and whether or not the cause is still undetermined. But there's this potential diagnosis that hangs over her family and hangs over her head, right, and has her parents pretty frightened. But it opens up within the story all this incredible opportunity, because her other senses are so keen, and her relationship to sound and language is so deeply examined, right? Things that maybe would be taken for granted in other situations. And it struck me that language and translation are a huge theme in the book, both the idea of English versus Spanish, hearing versus not hearing, reading versus writing, hearing versus reading, like all the different ways that language is communicated. So that came somewhat from your experience?
Yeah, from a school, and then I worked at another school that had a deaf and hard of hearing program too, and so I was taking ASL classes from one of the teachers who worked there, and it was just interesting how many different ways there are to communicate and learning about that, and just like learning to be more accommodating in the way that we communicate with other people and everything. And so that is what a lot of that was inspired by. And then some of Edda's also, with her, the hearing loss in many years comes like the vertigo, which is something I had a child. And so some of her experiences are based off, although we don't have the same chronic illness and disability, based off of my experiences as well. So yeah, it all kind of came together, and I think that I feel very lucky, and I just loved working with all the students I got to work with. And so I just was constantly learning from them about how big the world and how big our use of language can be, and how it's a lot more than what we usually think. And so that made its way.
Okay, so then as in your process of drafting the story, how much of that just sort of came in, and how much of it did you know in advance, I want to incorporate these different aspects?
I think a lot of it came in naturally, and a lot of things I didn't even realize were based off of like my own experiences until I was reading it. And I was like, oh yeah, that is where that came from. But I think that it was more of a natural thing, where just this world, it just came about because that's the world that I've gotten to experience with it. So
talk a little bit about Edda's experience of loud days and quiet days. I thought that it's beautiful on a lot of levels, and in the beginning of the story you don't necessarily realize that that's literal, right? You aren't sure exactly what it means, but talk about where that came from.
And so that was also one of my colleagues when I was working in schools, because I was a school social worker, so I would work mostly with kids with disabilities. And one of the hearing itinerants there, she would write goals for some of the students, and it was about like, for some of these students who had this fluctuating hearing loss, about like learning to advocate for yourself on these quiet days. And I think from that I think that it was like just a really interesting, beautiful thing, that it's like you're fully accepting all of it and all of yourself and all of your days, and just figuring out how to advocate for yourself on some days, and how other people can be more accommodating for you and things like that. So that is how that
it's really great. I also love the relationship of her to her parents, and that the parents were not adversarial. In so many middle grade books, there's a joke that if you're writing middle grade, the first thing you have to do is get rid of the parents, because that's when things happen, right? When the parents are not in the way of the children. And often there's an adversarial or confrontational dynamic between the kids and the parents, and it was really refreshing and lovely how the family dynamic was supportive and mutually supportive, right? And Edda's also really supportive of her parents in their goals and dynamics.
So a lot of that was inspired by my own parents.
Nice.
My mom. So there's like, in the first opening of the book, there's a lot with her mom. My mom has not made it past that part of the book yet still, because she's like, every time I try to read it, I just cry. But so they are so supportive. And so I think that like her parents not just being like, oh, you have something that needs to be fixed, but they're like, no, like, what can we do to like help you be able to be fully yourself on all your days? And so them just like diving in immediately. But then I love the way also that she thinks about their worries too, and that they all just care for each other.
They do. They all take care of each other in really sweet ways. Okay, so as I was reading it, I had so many stories and books that came to my mind where I thought like, ooh, like is there an actual allusion to this? Or is this just me seeing this archetype in the story? And it's very possible that it's just me. But I want to read you the list of stories it made me think of, and I want to know if any of these were in your mind as you were reading. Okay. So Homer's The Odyssey,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
They're especially like when they start to read and fall asleep.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That for sure.
Yeah.
I actually at one point I was thinking about making it like an actual like straight
Yep.
reimagining
Yep.
of the Odyssey, and then I took that out. But there's still
Yeah.
some bits that lead
Loved
to
it.
Mhm.
Loved it. The Wizard of Oz.
Maybe subconsciously.
A little bit,
but
not over.
Not
It was
overtly.
when they started meeting people along the journey and like gathering friends to go forward, and also
Yes.
the idea of Toto and
Mhm.
Louisa, you know, Toto running off. Okay,
Yeah.
so I made that just made me okay. Alice in Wonderland,
Yeah.
a little bit,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
Orpheus in the Underworld.
No.
The
I don't
whole
think I've
idea.
actually
So
read
that's
that.
Ovid,
Yeah.
ancient Greece.
Mhm.
It's the idea where it's an underworld story where Orpheus has to go down to the underworld to rescue his bride, and Hades makes a deal with him that he can only take her back to the land of the living if he walks out and doesn't look back. Of course, he looks back, and so she's doomed to stay there. But the whole notion of sort of going into this other world in order to rescue a loved one, that's what made me think of it. And then along those same lines, the idea of Persephone in the underworld with Hades, and how she eats the pomegranate seeds and then she's doomed to spend half the year there. When they were in the train car, spoiler alert, they go through this magical train. When they saw all the food, I was like, don't eat the food! You never eat the food in the underworld. The whole idea of Dante's Inferno, like there being layers and different trials and the different levels.
Yeah.
Was that in your head too?
I would say that was probably more subconsciously, and I think also the Persephone too. That I didn't really think about that until a different friend pointed out to me. And I was like, oh yeah.
Like I even have when I've had dreams where I'm in a bad situation in my dream, and there's food. I think in my sort of survival brain, like don't eat the food.
Yeah.
Don't eat the food or you'll be trapped here. The Phantom Toll Booth. All the stuff with the language and the
for
and,
sure. Yeah,
the
I love
sort of-
that one. Such a classic middle grade use of language and stuff. So.
and eccentricities and
Yeah.
playful. Loved it. Okay, this may be a stretch, but if I definitely thought of Harry Potter with the train and with the 9 cars, just because of station or platform 9 and 13.
Yeah.
Were you thinking about that?
I didn't think about that at all, but I was thinking a bit about the room of requirement in Harry Potter, how it kind of it shows up as whatever you need it to be, and how that's kind of what the train would be if it wasn't functioning.
Totally. So then there are 9 cars on the train. Was the number 9 significant in any way?
No.
It's just a lovely number.
Yeah. And actually it was 13, which I think is like more of a just the kind of classic literary number. But I was told that was too many, so I had to cut it down.
13 and then have to cut?
And I think I've written many more than 13 because like some were there and then got cut and new ones got added, so there's a whole bunch of other train cars.
So each car there's an adventure that the kids have to navigate in each car, and there are 9 cars. See, I want to read the other ones. Maybe you should publish those on your website. It's just like
they are really fun.
Outtakes.
Yeah, I do. Some of them I really love. So
the last one I thought of was Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and it was really just because of the last scene.
I guess I can see that. I think that for that I like that vibe of like the kind of whimsy and stuff. So
and the flying. So something for everyone in this book, clearly, right? If you liked any of those books, you would love this book. So the thing that struck me as being similar thematically to Alone is that there's a moment near the end of both books where the characters have a revelation and let go of false beliefs. And that's ultimately what frees them to accomplish their goals, right? And in Edda, it's the notion of being driven by fear or not, which is such a core inhibition in maybe every human, right? What would you do if you weren't afraid? And in Alone, it's the anticipation and the waiting for her family to come back and hanging on to this hope that they're going to come back. And once Maddie lets go of hope and just accepts that this is my situation, she's liberated. And when Edda and her friends let go of the fears that are inhibiting them,
Yeah.
they're liberated to find
Yeah.
what they need.
Yeah.
Was that something you were playing with from the very beginning, or did that evolve out of the adventure?
I think I was playing with it from the beginning, but I also think that it evolved both out of the adventure and out of my own journey writing this book.
Sure.
Because I also was like
Yeah.
needing to find some hope and some perseverance through this all.
Yeah.
So, but it was definitely that kind of thought about fear and hope was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about your journey. How long did this take you, and what were the iterations that you went through?
Yeah, so I started writing it in 2017. I actually wrote it as a short story first. So it was just no magic or anything. It was just Ed and Eleazar meeting. So the scene when he runs behind the bus.
Yep.
So that was inspired by the school I was working at. They had this kind of like urban legend that there was once this kid who like chased the bus to school and won.
Oh my
And we don't know if it's true or not. Like I was there on the day and everyone was like, he did it, he beat the bus to school. Nobody knows if it's true.
I want it to be
but,
true.
Yeah. But so that was the short story, and so I entered that into the We Need Diverse Book short story contest. I got third place, and getting third place, you get feedback from an editor,
Oh, cool.
and she was like, this feels like not a short story. And then I was kind of like, oh, maybe I'll try to make it into a full middle grade book. And so then after I wrote it, I was in Pitch Wars, which is a mentorship program, and so that's when really a lot of the like comic elements and things like that came into the story more in full force during that. And then found our agent, and so this is although it's been a long journey, I think it's been 8 or 9 years that I've been working on it. This was my first completed book and things like that, so it's really exciting to see it finally out.
So exciting.
Yeah. So, and there, a lot of things, I feel like the core of the themes stayed the same. Like, I feel like one of the scenes that's changed the least is the final scene in like the train car, and as well as my favorite train cars, like the food and stuff. Those are pretty similar. But other than that, it was a lot of moving things around, a lot of working on the pace and things. So they actually used to get off the train in the middle of the book. And then our agent, Danielle, was like, they can't get off the train. They need to have rising tension. And another thing I was going to talk about, because we both have dogs in our book, is that because I love the dog so much, I was sad that she wouldn't be there for most of the book. So I also, in the early versions, they find the dog in the middle. And then the rest of the book is about more fixing the train and saving the city. And then my agent also was like, they can't find the dog in the middle. Once they find the dog, the story's over. So,
and what's cool too in the design of the book is that at the end of each chapter, there's an illustration that shows the train with 9 cars and an X through each, like it actually marks and counts down the journey. So there's this very clear sort of driving energy to get through. I don't know if you can see it on one of those pages. But I thought that was a great device.
I love it. And I love the illustration of the train.
Did that surprise you? Did you know they were going to do that?
I think that it wasn't something. I'm trying to remember now. I can't remember if I went on sub with that. Because I know that, so I made like a very poorly drawn version of it. And I had it at the bottom, like in Microsoft Word. And then I was like more to help me keep track. And then my editor, I think, was like, let's make this a real illustration. So you can see that really they count down to how many train cars they have left to get to the little dog at the end.
I mean, it almost has a video game kind of quality to it of conquering the different levels and achieving different goals at each level. But not knowing necessarily what it is they're trying to do. I mean, there's this cloak of mystery over the whole thing, which is really wonderful. Was climate change in your brain at all with all of this?
Not really. I think it was more just that I wanted like a visual representation of the fear, and then I think that came about. And I loved the like fireworks and just like Chicago can be a gray and cloudy city, so just to like make that even more intense. But I wasn't directly thinking about climate change.
It's the visual description of the purple clouds and the smoke is really beautiful, and I mean it's manifested on the cover too. But it's hard to read something about storms in this climate, no pun intended, in our current situation, and not be thinking about this specter that hangs over us all.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm also curious, two things about Alone, also about was kind of the big disruption in life, the disappearance. Was that inspired by anything? I know that it was a reimagining, but also was that anything in our current climate that was making you think about that?
No, only because I wrote it before our climate became what it is. I actually wrote the first draft in about 2010, and I wrote it as a novel in prose, and I worked on that for several years, and even went out on sub with it in that form, and then rewrote it in verse. And so that's one of the reasons it took as long as it did to land where it did. In Island of the Blue Dolphins, it's very clear why the community leaves their island, right? That we see the whole story leading up to the main character's tribe and family leaving, and she's left behind. I needed to figure out, in a contemporary 21st century setting, what would cause an entire town to be evacuated? How could a kid be left behind and not discovered? We've got all this technology, in the 1830s, when the real event that inspired the Island of the Dolphins happened. Once you're gone, and there's no way to communicate, right? But in the 21st century, that's not the case. So I had to solve a bunch of problems story-wise that a contemporary setting created. Technology being one of them. But I also didn't want the reason they were leaving to be something that would further complicate her survival. So I didn't want it to be environmental, because I didn't want her to get sick. I didn't want it to be an invading army or something like that, because I wanted her to be alone. So so I was kind of going through all the different possible causes and effects to think about what could plausibly happen, right? Where I could get a reader to suspend their disbelief long enough to accept the premise of the story. Because the thing that fascinated me was this notion of a kid surviving by themselves in a contemporary setting and in a suburban setting. So it's been compared to Hatchet, but Hatchet is truly an alien environment, right? Like he's literally dropped into a forest and has to figure it out. She's left behind in her home, so she has to figure out how to survive, but in a setting she's really comfortable in. So the thing that I ultimately came up with, and there's a reference to it. These are spoilers, but there's a reference to it in the last poem, that it was something political. It's something where there's fraud that's perpetrated, where the government causes everyone to evacuate, perhaps under false pretenses. Maybe it's something to do with resources or minerals or some mining, we don't know, but it's something that causes everybody to be relocated, and then nothing happens to that location, so she can experience that thing. And the ending of the book, I put it right out there, it's controversial. People either love it or they hate it. And I've gotten some very passionate letters from people who really don't like the ending.
They wanted less ambiguity?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And they want a neater bow tied on it. And I think there's less ambiguity than some readers realize if you closely read that last
I
poem.
didn't think it was too ambiguous.
But some people really, thank you, but not everybody does. So so then when we moved into 2016, and then we moved into the pandemic, and we had all of these themes of discord and governmental angst and isolation and all those themes that are present here. Total coincidence. So it was just total coincidence.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then my other question for you was when we were talking about the similar themes with some of what happens to our girl characters towards the end of their story. I just loved also what you did with Hope, and that like it was really beautiful when she's looking at the Emily Dickinson poem and thinking about how much harder it is to hold on to hope than it is to figure out how to survive. And then so I'm curious, because we were talking about what books influenced me were those Emily Dickinson and Mary Oliver poems always in your mind as like being important at that part of the book, or did that evolve as it went on?
No, they weren't, and in early drafts they weren't even present at all. It wasn't until I started rewriting it in poetry, and I was a poet before I was ever an aspiring novelist. I wrote poetry much longer, and when I started to revise this book into verse, I felt like I had found my language, like I was speaking my native tongue, as opposed to trying to write prose that I was not yet fluent in. That's kind of how it felt. And I also aged it. I was thinking about it as possibly a YA as opposed to middle grade, and so that let me go into places psychologically that I hadn't explored as a middle grade.
Right.
And we ended up bringing it back to middle grade, and we marketed it as upper middle grade.
Yeah.
But the combination of the poetry and the opportunity to let her be older led me to explore aspects of her psychological and emotional experience that I hadn't in the earlier drafts.
Okay.
In the earlier drafts, it was much more visceral, sort of physical. There wasn't as much psychological. It was there in my head, but it wasn't there on the page. And when I started writing it in poetry, I was really able to go into her body and into even her sort of spiritual experience of the existentialism of who am I if my family's not here?
Right.
When we're defined by our relationships and those relationships disappear, what does that leave? And so that all of that sort of existential stuff that then she goes to the library a lot because I turn off the power, so she has to do research the old-fashioned way, and she ends up reading poetry books, and then I just led her to Mary Oliver and Emily Dickinson because I love them, right? And I was like, okay, I need a poem about hope. I know who has a great poem about hope. Emily Dickinson has a great poem, so I sort of backed into it.
That's great.
But I think one of the things that's fun about both of our books, they could not be more different in a lot of sort of superficial ways, but the connection to literature, like there's a legacy of literature that they both are resting on, I think. And the notion of girls sort of reaching beyond what they think they're capable of. And then of course, a dog to inspire and aspire to be like, all of that. There's a lot of really great thematic connections that are not necessarily obvious. Pretty fun.
Yeah, definitely.
It's
and the covers match.
And they're both published by Aladdin, Simon & Schuster Aladdin. Shout out to our wonderful imprint, and I think Aladdin did really well by both of these stories.
Yes, they definitely did.
Couldn't be happier. Well, thank you to Second Star for having us. Thank you for coming to Denver.
Yeah,
so glad you were able
such
to
a
be
great
here.
conversation. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.